Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's a supernatural experience that happened in your life that you just cannot explain? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. As a kid, I used to spend the night at a friend's house around 12 to 13. We decided to go out and do some ding-dong ditching and engage in some adolescent angsty debauchery because our parents were not at home. It's around 1 or 2 a.m. when we arrive home. The doorbell rings and we immediately assume it's the authorities or an enraged neighbor. My friend had a small window on the front porch that you couldn't see into from the street, so we peeked in to see who was calling at such a late hour. An elderly woman dressed in a gown and a small child dressed in strange Newsies attire stood at the door. Because it was the 1990s, they were both dressed extremely out of period. My acquaintance had never seen any of them before in the neighborhood. We ducked because we were a little startled, then look again in less than 10 seconds, and they both vanished. They vanished without a trace, with no one on the street walking away or automobiles driving away. We didn't get much sleep. Till this day, I have no idea what happened. When my son was 2.5 years old, there was a period of time that for like a week he would wake up every single night exhausted at 1:55 a.m., screaming, crying, and yelling for about a minute before going back to sleep again. Me and my wife brushed it off at the beginning. That's until we noticed that every single time it happened, it was at the same hour, 1:55. So naturally, we started to check up on him every time, but nothing. He was just sleeping pretty peacefully. One morning, I finally asked him if he remembered waking up screaming and yelling that night. He told me that he, in fact, did remember. So I asked him what's up, and for a moment, a glaze of terror flashed his face. It's because the old, scary gray man, Daddy. He has glowing red eyes, and he's trying to grab me while screaming. He then proceeded to eat his banana as if we had a small talk about the weather. Well, that night, he slept with us. And while my wife and son were sleeping peacefully, I was wide awake, only to hear at exactly 1:55 a.m. what sounded like the loud shouts of an old man. A shout that lasted for about 3 seconds. I got up and ran to my son's room and found nothing. About 2 days later, everything got back to normal. Was it just nightmares my son had? Maybe. I have no reasonable explanation. I worked a third shift in the emergency room. When a baby was born, a little chime would play over the hospital speakers. I think it was Rockabye Baby. One night, a man was driven in by car. It was an OD and he was unconscious. The nurses and doctors were doing CPR on the stretcher on the way to the trauma room. Sadly, he passed away. The second that the doctor called time of death, all the lights in the emergency room went out. The backup generator came on, and Rockabye Baby played immediately after the generator kicked in. This all took less than a minute. To this day, I still remember the chills I got that night. Whatever it was so freaky. The second was when my spouse and I were looking to buy a house. We pulled up with a realtor, and I immediately did not want to go into that house. It felt wrong. Well, we went in anyway. The second we got in, I felt like I was trespassing and wanted to leave. We walked through the house, and the realtor opens the door to the basement and turns on the light. As soon as the light came on, I saw a black shadow run. We both saw it and thought it was my spouse, so we went down. All the strings that you pulled to turn the lights on and off were tied like nooses. It was creepy as all got out. My spouse came down the stairs, and I asked them what they were doing upstairs since we both thought they were down in the basement. Spouse said they were in the garage and not in the basement. Right as we were leaving the basement, something pushed me. I felt a hand on my back and everything. As soon as we left, we both said that house was haunted. That night, my spouse and I both had the same nightmare about an old lady in black with frizzy hair. The nightmares lasted about a week for both of us. I'm not religious, but the only thing that got rid of this old lady was saying the Our Father prayer over and over again. It still scares the crap out of me to this day. I don't even drive on that street. That's how scared I am of that house. While working at the City Tavern in Old City, Philadelphia, considered to be one of the most haunted buildings in the U.S., have seen full dinner service, plates, utensils, glasses, and all fly off the table we call Big Round in the middle of dinner service. Not sort of topple over, but full-on suicide yeet off the table. Personally, I've witnessed this occur twice, with one of the times being a slower dinner service with nobody seated at the round, but it happened often enough that every server and even a few customers came to expect it from time to time. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for it occurring. Maybe a really specific vibration from the subway was my best guess, except the train doesn't go below the historic district. When opening the building would sometimes sound like many people were in it, even when we knew it was only a few of us there. The place is huge and lots of stairwell dumbwaiters, so I guess it's a trick of acoustics? Weird icy drafts out of nowhere, shifting furniture, etc. Every haunted house cliche seems to just naturally occur in the place. Ask anyone who ever worked there. The place is straight up spooky at times. Sadly, Chef Walter Stabe, the last proprietor, had to close the place due to COVID-19 and will not be reopening. This is only the second time the place is closed in its 250-year history. During the summer between 7th and 8th grade, I went to a pool party at my friend's house. I went to use the restroom, but somebody was already using the downstairs bathroom, so I asked my friend's mom if there was another. I was on the verge of pissing myself. She sent me to the upstairs bathroom, and I had to pass across a long, wide landing. I did my business, and as I opened the door to leave the bathroom, it felt like the AC had been turned on full blast. I got chills instantly and felt off. I hustled across the landing, and as I took the first step down the stairs, it felt like someone breathed down my ears and neck. I instantly pushed my shoulders up, tilted my head back, jumped down a few stairs, and turned around as fast as possible. No one was there, but I heard a voice, muffled but audible, say, "It's okay. I'm not in pain anymore." I can still remember the chill that went down my spine to this day. I bolted down the stairs as fast as possible and never told anyone about it. Years later, I was drinking with that same friend at a party in college and drunkenly confessed what I experienced, and she just casually went, "Oh yeah, that's my grandpa. He died in our house, and his spirit's still there." My ex-girlfriend had a dream about my family members who all passed on. She never met them, and I only mentioned a few things about some of them. She was describing them with some detail, and I knew which family member she was talking about. I wanted to believe, but she said my dad was there, but I told her he was still alive. She was adamant about my dad being there with my other passed-on family. I struggled because everything was 100% spot on, but my dad wasn't dead. A month later, a cousin told me my dad had passed away 2 months earlier, which was a month before my girlfriend's dream. A few years back, when I was still doing my A-levels, it was around 7 a.m. in the morning, and I was first in class, as I like to do readings before class. As usual, I like to leave the lights off and do readings with my phone light. Suddenly, I heard someone walking around frantically at the back of the class, and were like hitting the tables as it was walking. It sounded chaotic, so I turned around to look to see who it was, and I was shocked, because the sound stopped and there was no one at the back of the class. So I just continued doing my readings as I thought I was hearing things. Then the sound started again, and this time I heard a loud knock on the door, and it creaked open and shut loudly at the back of the class. When I heard that, I quickly grabbed my things and ran out of the class and sat in the students' lounge. It's disturbing because the class had only one entrance, and I was sitting in front of it. I waited for my friends to arrive and brought them back to the class. There was no door there. One of the earliest clear memories I have is being at the fire station with my dad. He was a volunteer firefighter at the time, and one of his friends helping me spray him with a small fire hose. I've always had a distinct recollection of this friend of Dad's standing behind me, holding the hose and me while I opened the nozzle. When I was in my 20s, Dad was telling me that story, but according to him and my mother, there was nobody there with me. He said a couple of the guys were joking around, asking if I wanted to spray Dad with the hose. Later in the day, I wandered off and was messing with the hose before anyone noticed. Dad described it as a goddamned miracle that the hose didn't start flailing around and kill me. I used to think of this as a guardian angel encounter, but I distinctly remember the guy who was helping me with the hose, egging me on to spray Dad. This seems like pretty unangelic behavior. About 12 years ago, I was on a road trip with a buddy. We were watching TV in our hotel room before going to grab a bite to eat. The TV went from ball game to blank screen, but the TV wasn't off. As I'm getting up to figure out what was wrong with the TV, the blank screen starts writing 666 death in green text, like something you would see on a computer from the late 80s. It kept writing it all the way down the screen. When the writing got to the bottom of the screen, the TV went blank again, and the game came back on. Without saying a word, we both grabbed our stuff and noped out of there. I'm 90% sure it was someone effing with us, but to this day I can't figure how. Well, if that was a prank, that's a pretty good prank. That would be jarring for sure, so I probably would have left you. Not scary supernatural story follows. I got a funny one and definitely cannot explain this to this day. I was on vacation in Korea with my then girlfriend, now my wife, and my parents in 2016. We were somewhere in the northeastern part of the country in Soraskin National Park. We stopped at a crowded set of restrooms. I had to do a normal number 2, nothing special, just a little urgent, but not too bad. I was the only one that needed to go, so both my parents and my girlfriend just waited outside in the crowded area. I waited for an empty stall and got one after maybe a minute of waiting. Sat down and did my business. When it came time to wipe, I looked up and bam, no TP. I sit there for a few extra seconds, maybe a minute or two, contemplating when I can try to do the shuffle of shame to the next stall. As I'm waiting, I hear my dad unexpectedly call out to me and I answer back. He says something along the lines of, "Wendy, my girlfriend, heard you yell you were out of toilet paper." Then he hands me the toilet paper over from the stall down the door. I'm blown away. I exit and find everyone, and I immediately tell them that I didn't say a thing and my girlfriend's tripping. She swears she somehow heard me calling through the crowded area or restroom to them that I needed toilet paper. I never said a word. Either this is just extremely coincidental and happened by accident, like, what are the odds this would happen by accident, or it was the supernatural boyfriend-girlfriend TP telepathy, lol. I'll choose the latter. I'm now married to girlfriend, lol, and still can't explain this. I had a nightmare of one of my good friends getting in a car accident, being ejected and dying. It was such a real feeling that I woke up and puked immediately from the fear. I debated calling him at all because I'd sound like an effing lunatic, but ultimately figured that it was bullshit. But just to cover my bases, I'd call him. I call him up and the first thing I say is, "This is going to sound crazy, but hear me out." I told him if he happens to go out tonight to not get in a small 4-door blue sedan because it's going to get into an accident. And if he does get into it, just please wear a seatbelt and don't sit on the right back passenger side. He laughed his ass off and said, "Yeah, whatever," but I was being crazy. Later that night, he calls me frantic, sounding like he's in tears. Apparently, he and some of his friends were going to hit up a local club. Dude pulls up in a little blue Honda. My friend was trying to get in, but thought about my call and got an awful feeling. He told him he'd ride with someone else. On the way to the club, he watched a Honda get T-boned crossing an intersection on the back passenger side. Thing was obliterated. Thankfully, no one died, but they were seriously effed up. He said he was absolutely sure he'd have effing died because that's where he would have been sitting. His friend and girlfriend had taken the seats up front, and since he was so tall, he'd have to sit behind the passenger for more legroom. This happened years ago when I was a teenager, but I remember wanting to sleep in my guest room really badly for a few nights. I chalked it up to being a bigger bed and a cooler room, which was nice during the hot summer days. But for 3 straight nights, I would wake up at 3 a.m. to a tap on the window and a super bright light pouring in through the blinds, and each night I said, "No, go away, don't come inside," and then rolled over to sleep. After the second night, I told myself to get up and investigate to see what the light was. But on the third night, I woke up with a powerfully intense feeling like I absolutely needed to stay in bed and repeat that phrase again. However, instead of rolling over to go back to sleep, I stayed still to see what would happen. I then saw the light wave like it understood what I said and was waving goodbye. And then the lights disappeared. Never happened again after that. To this day, I hate myself for not getting up and looking out the window to see what sort of alien thing was tapping at my window. I, then 19, slept on a mattress on the floor next to my ex. He slept, and I was almost falling asleep, until I heard this repeating zooming sound. It was closing my ears, like when you're on an airplane. I can't really explain the sound, as I still to this day can't compare it to any other sound I've heard, and I'm 30 plus. A glowing, tall, naked creature that looked like a man without genitals was standing at the end where my feet were. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body was paralyzed. It came closer and bent over to me. There were no eyes. I was looking straight into a yellowish-bluish light. When we were forehead to forehead, I passed out. I woke up gasping for air. I panicked and woke up my ex. He said it was just a nightmare and just to let him sleep. When I told him later on that day, he said, I just made it up for attention and that I'm crazy. This is why I never talked about it until now. I don't really know what to think of it. It didn't cause me harm. It also didn't return. It's just one of my very strong memories. My girlfriend's mother has an uncanny knack for predicting births and deaths of family members. When someone in the family dies, parents, aunts, cousins, children, etc., not terribly extended, her father shows up in his car in his girlfriend's mom's dream. Her prediction accuracy is uncanny. The dreams come prior to anyone's notification of death, and in some cases, before the person actually dies within 48 hours. She has no false positives that I'm aware of, and all deaths are in her immediate and extended family. So this isn't a case of, I had the dream and my neighbor's sister died. This is, I had the dream and Auntie M died. Births aren't quite the same, but they're close. Last year, she sent a group text message to a family asking who was pregnant. Nobody fessed up immediately. 8.5 months later or so, there's a new baby in the family. She's done this for 5 out of 5 grandchildren and 2 out of 3 nieces and nephews. Around 6 years ago, I was cycling to a friend's. My bicycle at the time had no brakes as I was waiting for parts to repair it. I had a cat-eye speedo on it, and I was traveling at about 30 miles per hour. I came to the 90-degree corner I was supposed to turn into at that speed with no brakes, so I took the chance and leaned hard into the corner. There was a narrow path with grass and mud on either side. I'd thrown the bike that hard into the corner at that speed that my back wheels skipped across the path and into the mud hard enough to completely fold my wheel 90 degrees like an L shape and spit me all the way across the other side of the path and bend my wheel 180 degrees the other way. Last thing I remember was being tangled up in my frame, heading toward the ground at probably 25 miles per hour. Now, head and neck first, sideways, sort of crooked. I'd assume I'd be disabled or dead. Next thing I know, I'm walking down the path like nothing had happened. It even took me a few seconds to stop and be like, wait, I had a bike? So I turn back and I'm easily 15 to 20 feet away from my bike. And as I approach it, I find it buried in the floor, like the entire one side of the handlebars completely buried in the floor. I prized my bike out of the floor and carried it the rest of the way to my friends, pretty shaken up. Personally, I believe an angel saved me that day, but either way, it spooked me good. My life flashed before my eyes as I was contemplating suicide one evening. It started from the present, moving backwards in flashes of increasing speed. This induced a panic attack, and I started laughing and crying at the same time. Every person I ever cared about had a flash. At the end, I realized I'd had a good life, and I didn't want to kill myself. That night, I had a dream that my mother was holding my head against my childhood bedroom window, and over a dozen dragonflies came out of the darkness and spread their wings against the glass upside down. The following day, I went rowing with my girlfriend. We were on a family holiday in the Lake District of the UK, and while we were in the middle of Keswick Lake, just admiring the view, a dragonfly came and landed on my hand. It's never happened to me before. Later at dinner, I asked my parents, who were both religious and work for the church, what the symbol of the dragonfly meant. They had worn dragonfly pins to work throughout my childhood, and they told me it was a symbol of death and rebirth. I'm not religious at all, and I still struggle to reconcile the experience. My dad told me not to overthink it and just take it as synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence.